So my name is Fatima Salman. I am the president-elect of NASW Michigan. I work at the University of Michigan at the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan, and I am part of a group called Engage. And I'm a macro social worker, community organizer. And so our main focus of work at Engage is to connect community organizations on the ground in Detroit, most specifically, to the resources and opportunities and faculty and staff and students over at the university. Before I was at the university, I was the executive director of a national student organization called the Muslim Students Association. And I wasn't a student, but I was their executive director. So that was an interesting time to be their executive director because it was right when the transition between the Obama House and the Trump administration. So I'm sure you can understand there was a lot of things going on within the Muslim students across the country. And so a lot of my experiences in terms of community organizing comes from specifically that time period, because I think it was a very different and volatile time period to be doing community organizing, especially for the population that I was serving. Sounds like the sound is low. I'm not sure if I can do anything on my end. It might have to be on your end, Siham. And prior to that, I've been in many different organizations, in and out of them. And really, I feel like to a certain extent, I've done community organizing since I was a youth. I didn't get back into doing my master's until much later in life, after I had done teaching and all sorts of other things, but finished up my master's in 2016. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you today as we talk about community organizing and racial justice. Could I get just in the chat though, I'd love to know if there are any, like how many maybe, or like what's the number of community organizers or macro social workers that we actually have in the room? Because I have a feeling many of you are probably IP, which is great, but it also helped me in understanding who's in the room. So if you could just show me if there are any, or how many there are, I guess. It'd be good to know. Is the sound still low? Background. Hi, Lauren. Yeah, it might be just that you need to raise your own sound. That could be it. All right, so looks like a few of you, but it looks like probably the majority is, okay, there are. Okay, good. Okay, good to know. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about our ethical responsibility as social workers to the broader society. Because, you know, why do we do the work that we do? Why do we think of why, you know, why, and we all know this, right? But especially as it relates to the broader society. And so I just wanted to give everybody a reminder of our sixth portion of our NASW Code of Ethics. And really, this is what grounds us in this work. This is what frames our work. And this is what moves our work as community organizers or in that community organizing space. So I just want to, you know, I'm not going to read all of this, but I think we know it, but it's always good to go back to our core values and these statements so that we can remind ourselves what it is, why it is that we do what we do. So if you want to quickly read it, but this is really what's grounding our work. And I want to start off by talking about positionality. Positionality, because even before we go into those spaces, and this is from a macro level, from a meso level, from a micro level, from all levels, we all know this, is that we have to go inwards into ourselves first, right? And understand who we are, what we bring to the table, our own traumas we bring to the table, our own biases we bring to the table, before we go out into any space, whether it's in our private practice or within our communities. Now, this is an important practice too, and I always feel like whenever I do go out into a community or start by going out into a community, this idea of mindfulness is really important, is remembering who you are and what it is that you've come with. And of course, we change as people throughout our lives. We're always changing. We're always bringing more or less stuff to the table. And it's a matter of recognizing who it is and what part of your own life you're at and when you're bringing that yourself to the table. Sometimes we have to remember also is when we are going into communities that there are things that could trigger us within our own traumas, and to recognize that so that you're aware before it even happens, so that you can best intervene or help in a community. And so I just want to start off by reminding everybody about positionality and really sitting with yourself and really assessing your own positionality, assessing who you are is really critical. And recognizing also that there are times that maybe because of your positionality, you may not be that person that can go in and intervene. You may not be that person that can go in and help another individual. So really realizing not just who you are, but your own strengths and weaknesses and your boundaries, your own boundaries that will or will not help you get to a spot that you need to get into. So, and I think this is, I think, a practice that has to happen often in our careers, often in our work that we do. It's not a one-time thing, it's a several-time thing, right? And like I said, is we are changing, we ourselves are changing constantly. So constantly recognizing that is important. And I think also recognizing how far you can go, that there are times that you have to stop yourself because it's just gotten, it's gotten too much for you. Recognizing that you can, it's a maxim I feel like that I practice is I can only give when I have, right? So knowing when I do have and knowing when I can give. I also wanted to talk about setting the stage of this idea of cultural competency versus cultural humility. And cultural competency is a term that has constantly been used over and over again in our profession. But I want to actually challenge that. And many of you might have heard, this idea between cultural competency versus cultural humility. It's something that over at the Ginsberg Center at the University of Michigan, they discuss a lot. And what is the difference? So I'm going to give you a quick definition of what cultural competency is. I have references if anybody needs these references also. But cultural competency is loosely defined as ability to engage knowledgeably with people across cultures. There is an assumption that the more knowledge we have about another culture, the greater the competence in practice. Now, what we challenge with this is that cultural competency has two main problems. First, it suggests that there is categorical knowledge a person could attain about a group of people, which leads to stereotyping and bias. And it denotes that there's an endpoint to become fully cultural competent. It means that, like, you think that there's a final solution. What cultural competency does, it ignores many times the effect of race, racism, and white supremacy. So that's cultural competency. And the more, I think, appropriate way to look at this idea is cultural humility. And just in general, I think when you think about it as humility versus competency, just the word itself changes your idea of how to go about looking at this, right? And so Dr. Shamaila Khan from Boston University defined cultural humility as it involving and understanding the complexity of identity, that even in sameness, there is a difference, and that a clinician will never be fully competent about the evolving and dynamic nature of a patient's experiences. So cultural humility means opening up a conversation that really attempts to understand a person or a community's identities as it relates to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, social needs, and others. Again, we go back to this idea of positionality because your awareness of self is central to that notion of cultural humility. And it helps you and gives you awareness of the community and the people that you are going to. Okay, now some questions that you can ask yourself as you try to achieve this culture of humility and positionality is, which parts of my identity am I aware of? Which parts of my identity are privileged or marginalized? How does my sense of identity shift based on context and setting? What are the parts that I project onto people? What are the parts that are received well by people? And who are those people that receive those parts well? And what are my own blind spots and biases? So just some questions that you can ask yourself as you're going and starting off and going into a community. I'm also fully aware that sometimes when we do go into communities as a community organizer, you don't have all that time to think about all this, right? So being able to ground yourself on those off times and being able to understand yourself on those off times is a really critical part of our own journeys. It's important. So this is something that's an interesting concept. I love the idea that we talk about cultural humility now. It's becoming more mainstream to talk about it this way as opposed to cultural competency. It's recognizing also that we don't know everything, or we are bringing our own biases to the table. It's recognizing that communities themselves are not monolithic. I think as a Muslim American, I recognize that often, because people that do try to come and intervene, or that are trying to, I guess, study the community, are constantly labeling everybody within my community all as the same and all as one. Whereas just like every other community, there are so many facets, so many types of us, so many types, so many different cultural nuances and things within my own community. So I think especially when you are part of a BIPOC or an other community, this is a concept that you recognize very often. I also want to talk a little bit about the idea of progressive community organizing. So a lot of this is, we're changing the verbiage, we're changing the language, we're changing the idea of how we go into communities and how and what community organizing actually is. And the reason why I want to talk about progressive community organizing is because it's changing this notion that, and the way it's changing is that it's recognizing that you have to add systems and power structures into your praxis. Like, you can't just go into a community and only focus on that core community, but rather there are so many other layers around it, layers of oppression, layers of power struggles, layers of disenfranchisement, all of these things that have also caused the reason why you're actually going into that community. And for this reason, it's extremely important to recognize that. I don't necessarily like the word progressive being added here, because I think progressive also, unfortunately, can, in our political context, has a very negative connotation, or it can be a triggering word for a lot of people too. I'd love to find a better word for that. But as we think of progressive here, we're thinking of, how do we really go outside the box of community organizing? And how do we think of it in a more holistic form, as opposed to just that nuclear community? Also, when we go, and when we do start thinking about these outside structures, when we do start thinking about these outside struggles of power, that is going to help us as community organizers much more effectively understand how to create capacity of that community, how to, in creating that capacity and in creating those interventions, how can you also overcome liberation and oppression? So this is an important idea to think about too, is that really going further beyond our almost nuclear idea of community organizing. If you have any questions, also, I don't mind having questions or even comments in the chat as we're going along. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about creating trauma-informed assessments and interventions. And the reason why I specifically add trauma informed is because I think that this is a very important, like we were talking about racial justice here too, right? So if we look and create our assessment and interventions based off of trauma informed approaches, this is how we can holistically try to understand our communities better, how to change our communities better, how to create interventions that are actually transformative. We as social workers are different in the sense of individuals that are activists per se, because as community organizers, social workers, we are looking really at this really big comprehensive what to do, how to get there, as opposed to going in and just quickly trying to create a solution and moving out. We also, as community organizers, it's important for us to create sustainable outcomes. It's important for us to create communities and to empower individuals to be able to sustain themselves and their communities after we have left and created our interventions. This is so critical as in our work. So what I wanted to discuss a little bit is, and also what I also wanted to discuss is the idea of how this relates. I mean, how there's so much overlap between this and even IP methods and techniques. And many of the IP methods and techniques, when you're assessing individuals, can be extrapolated and brought out further to be able to help communities. And at the end of the day, a community is a group of many individuals, right? Many individuals who have all of their own everything that comes to the table. So we have to look at it from both perspectives. Also, I want to put this out there is that especially in I think the time and place that we are in our country, in our state, in our local communities, the enormous amount of trauma that has been, and I think from right now where we are, that has been created by the two pandemics, as they say, right? The pandemic of COVID, and then of racial injustices and police violence. And so really it's very important as we go into communities and as we're talking with individuals, that we have a trauma-informed care and intervention idea. Now, as we go into communities, I think a lot of, when I was the executive director of the Muslim Students Association, I would go into big towns, small towns, little towns, all over the country, and walk in as a complete outsider, and really like have to do a needs assessment and an understanding of that community that I was walking into, from ground zero, from knowing almost nothing at times about that community. And in my own head, I'd always have kind of like a checklist in my, like I guess an informal checklist in my head on what it is that I needed to do to be able to create an intervention for whoever had reached out and had asked for help. And many of the times it looked a little like, okay, listen first and foremost, right? Listen. Recognize that the clients and the communities that we are working with are the experts themselves. And you're only there to facilitate an answer that has come from within. I think that's really critical in our work. And that is what marks us, I really believe, marks us differently as social workers as we go into communities and create interventions. I really think that's one of the hallmark traits of us as social workers, is that we recognize that the answers come from within that individual, come from within the community, come from the people on the ground. I think also what I'd always go in is try to figure out who the gatekeepers are, right? Who are the gatekeepers in the community? Who are the leaders? What are their dynamics within themselves as the gatekeepers and the leaders? Who likes each other? Who doesn't like each other? Why don't they like one another? Who has the ear of funders in that community? And why do they have the ear of funders? But I would even go even beyond that, because and go even beyond that and think of where are the grocery stores? Are the grocery stores? Who is, what's the foster care system like? All of these different things, environmental, all of it, what is the environment like? Pollution, all of that, because all of these things, and that's what we're talking about as we talk about progressive community organizing, is like all of these things are affecting this community, whether or not they're as blatant as you would think, or maybe they're hidden. Yeah, can you talk about trauma informed assessments? Yeah, that's we can talk about that in the end. I hope we have time. My presentation might go a little longer than I was hoping, so we will try to get to answer as many questions as possible. With the caveat also that, the questions that are coming, that I am not the expert in the room. I'd love to hear answers from other individuals, because I know that all of you have experience. So also, I think what was very important for me to recognize as I was going in and out of communities is the idea that being able to intervene is a privilege. And as we talk about positionality, also is recognizing your own privileges, right? Because when somebody has come out and asked you to help, it typically is alluding that you have resources and connections that you can help a community and be able to help them. And so recognizing that own privilege and that you come into a community is really critical. Also, what's important is, and with the work that I had done, a lot of it was trauma centered, because I was working with students across the country who were facing enormous amounts of trauma, who were facing enormous amounts of Islamophobic acts, hate crimes that were happening against them. Students don't live with their families. They live on campus communities. They're not around, they don't have a support group necessarily. So recognizing that whole person that would come out and try to ask me for help, or that whole community that was coming out and asking for help, I would always have to remember and recognize what is going on in that community. When you're creating interventions in a community, the multicultural coalition approach is something that's always been very effective in my own work, is making sure that when you are creating solutions that you do, and I know we say this over and over again, having everybody at the table, but really having everybody at the table, like all the different demographics, all the different sectors that you can think of that all want to band on and help create this intervention. But I think it's also important that when you do have a table and when you do have a coalition that you've created, you go back and you check and think, how many Black women are there in the room? How many BIPOC individuals are there in the room? Where, even though you've worked hard in getting that coalition started, but you go back and you make sure that everybody really is at the table. You do a second assessment when that actually happens. A lot of times, also recognizing that, especially in the work that I was doing as a social worker and an executive director in a non-social work organization, is that minor interventions are sometimes, I guess, slower paced than what people would have wanted or expected. And recognizing that sometimes you do have to expedite it, but if you do want to expedite it, that whole checklist and all of that stuff has to already be in my head in order to be able to expedite it. And sometimes I can't expedite it. Sometimes it was just not possible to expedite, and it just would end up becoming crisis mode solutions as opposed to long-term sustainable solutions. And there's a little bit of that in community organizing. There's a little bit of that in community organizing. And so those were different strategies and intervention strategies that I would work on in my own community organizing with different areas. Now, of course, a lot of time, now talking to everybody here in the room, though, I'm sure that, unless you're a part of a national organization or some, a larger entity, you probably all are not doing that type of work, but you're already going into communities that that you're aware of, that the demographics, that you have an understanding of. But even in that, right, it all holds the same. Who are the gatekeepers? Who are the leaders? How can I gain rapport in this community? What are the gaps? What are the gaps in this community that need to be filled? How can I create an ecosystem map as I go into this community to help me and everybody else in this community understand that community? And so always doing that really holistic needs assessment is critical as community organizers, but then also as this progressive community organizing idea is really understanding the entire ecosystem and landscape as you go in. Any questions? Okay, so what can we learn more about the progressive community organizing approach? I've got a whole bunch of resources and references in terms of progressive community organizing. I can share it with you, Renee. There's a great article that I have, which talks about progressive community organizing, but also talks about shifting the language of even empowerment of individuals and empowerment of communities. And I can share that with you afterwards. It looks like somebody's writing on my PowerPoint. And then also there was another question that came in about, especially with what happened in Buffalo and other areas that, even in our own state. This book that I have, I'm really kind of obsessed with this. It's called Incorporating Diversity and Inclusion. I don't know if you guys can see this. Incorporating Diversity and Inclusion into Trauma-Informed Social Work. It's actually recently it's written by Laura Quiros. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but it's recently written. So it's actually got a lot of discussion even around the pandemic and the racial injustices going on in the country. And it talks about, I will make those references available. Sure, absolutely. So it talks about not just from a community organizing perspective, but also from an IAP perspective. Like this book, I'm actually kind of obsessed with it because I keep on going back to it. It's it's a very, it was transformative for me to read this book. But it also has like a series of questions that you can ask yourself or ask communities or think about as you go into communities or go and work with clients that where you're trying to be very mindful of having a trauma-informed approach. So I will make that available as well. I think, Danielle, what we can do is I can send it out to you and then you can give it to everybody. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to end this portion, and we can have more questions in a bit, but the idea of us as social workers in Michigan, and going back to what I said earlier is I really do believe that a lot that as social workers, I mean, I'm biased, I know I'm biased, but I really believe that we can create the best of solutions in the environments that we are, because we understand the individual in a holistic level and also understand how to go into communities on a holistic level. And I've always seen when, I brought I started teaching at the University of Michigan. I brought in activists into my intro to community organizing class who are not social workers. And every time they come in, I challenge them and I say, by the end of this, I'm going to almost prove to you that you are utilizing probably 50% or more of social work principles and intervention methods in your own work as a community organizer. And it's typically true. And they do acknowledge that, right? And I think that we as social workers have enormous potential to be able to change the things that we are seeing around us. It's so critical. It's in our code of ethics. It was right there, right? It's right there. It's stated out. It's spelled out for us. So how can we as social workers in Michigan create that positive change and disruptions that we're hoping for, right? I want to, bring it back to NASW Michigan to let everybody know that, and I think Danielle had mentioned it earlier too, is we have committees that are aiming to create changes, create solutions for this. Our own social justice committee is a part of that. In our strategic planning that we developed for the next 3 years, anti-racism is an important part of that, and how we can, so as social workers, can create those environments and organizations that are committed to anti-racist practices and committed to change in our communities. So I think that we have an enormous opportunity here as social workers in our great state of Michigan to create lasting change and positive change in our spaces and places that we're a part of. We're from all over the state, but if we were able to just create just incremental change in all of our areas of residence or work, I think we could do a lot. Would like to have a successful example of community organizing a case presentation. That would be actually neat. Maybe in another one we could do that. I don't have anything off the top of my head that I could quickly whip up for you, but I think that would be nice to have a case presentation. We could go through something like that. Yeah, I actually had developed one there at the shooting that had happened years ago with those 2 college students, and I had developed a case presentation because I've worked a lot in the national level in my community. So a lot of the different things that I've worked on, I've actually developed in the case presentation. So Siham, if you want, I could actually share that with you, the case study that I had created for that, but that would be nice to maybe at another point have an actual case presentation where we could all go through it together, dissect it together, and go through that process together. I think that would be neat. The last thing I did want to talk about also is we have a fabulous online conference coming up. Danielle, do you mind putting that slide back up again?
Sure, give me a moment, I can pull it back up.
And this conference has a keynote who is very near and dear to my heart, Linda Sarsour, a really good friend who I met through community organizing, actually. And our passions aligned and our work aligned, and now we've become probably one of the closest of friends. But we are having her present at our June conference. The topic is written there: Many Voices, One Mission, Addressing Implicit Bias and Racism in Social Work. Linda is a internationally renowned community activist who I've always challenged her, and she agrees that she does utilize social work practices in the work that she does. Absolutely. And so when you hear her speak, you will absolutely hear things that she's saying where she recognizes the traumas of individuals, where she's recognizing intersectionality, where she's recognizing her own positionality as she goes into communities and tries to create interventions. She has a powerful story of her own self, and she continues to go all throughout the country and creating really incredible change. So we'd love to have you come. We are still collecting RFPs for this conference. So if you have anything that you would like to submit, we'd love to get it. I think they're going to drop that in the chat also, the RFP link to if you have anything that you wanted to submit. And that's concludes my presentation for today. We can go into questions. You can unmute yourself. I'd love to have a discussion. I'm all about discussions. I'm not the kind that likes to just present for 40 minutes, which I just did, but but I'd rather talk and discuss with all of you. Anything? Here we go. Here's the.
I'll ask a question. So it seems like everything is so overwhelming right now. And I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but are there any small steps that we might be able to take towards organizing our communities and making a difference in terms of the huge issues that we have to tackle today?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I always think that the best solutions are the ones that start local. I've worked on that national level for many years and keep on coming back to maybe my own local community, because I think that's where the most effective change really does happen, that when we're in our localized community and trying to create that change. Now, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about doing that when there's still a pandemic going on, right? Where there's still things that you can't necessarily go in person, where things are where so many things are still virtual. And I think those are things that we have to come up to solutions with even, right? Like the landscape is different from 2-3 years ago. I can't just, organize a rally without having to think of a whole list of things, of additional protections and all of that. I can't organize a community meeting without thinking of the most vulnerable people or people that are immunocompromised at this point, right? So like you said, it's really overwhelming. It is overwhelming, but I think as social workers, we go in, we assess, we figure out who are the other people that we can, because it's not a one person thing, right? We have to, and we all know that, we all recognize that, but we have to practice it, is that we figure out who are our allies that we can work with, who are the other people in the community that are already working, who are the grassroots leaders that are already working, how can we offer our own services to what's already existing, or do we need to help create another intervention that might not already be out there? But I think, like you said, though, it's what are those little steps? I think that first little step is really that assessment step. Assessment is so critical. It's so easy to kind of just jump in. It's really easy. But I think us as social workers, that's not our praxis. Like we assess before we jump in. We really try to figure out before we jump in, because this is what we're grounded in. And I think that's probably the most important first step. That's what I would say. What have you found some of the biggest challenges you face while organizing? The biggest challenges, I think one challenge I think that's important to call out is the idea that when you are working for a community, like I said before, is those solutions come from within the community, and they may not be what you would have done. They may not be what you yourself would agree with. But when you're working with that community, that solution, and that community wants a certain solution, that's the solution that you put forward, because the answer comes from the people. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, is that moving yourself out of the equation and really intervening and helping the community that you're working for. And I'll give you an example. That when I was the executive director of, I wasn't a student, like I said, I was much older than the students that I worked with, double their age most of the time. But there was a coalition, a national-based coalition that was forming. It was a multi-faith, multicultural coalition. And there were organizations on that coalition that the students themselves had really big problems with. And although me, as somebody older, I would hope more wise, but I wanted to join that. It was important because I was like, well, this is like a critical coalition to join, but I didn't, because my constituents or the people that I was, working for didn't want to, right? So a lot of times it's really taking yourself out of that equation that can be the hardest part of it sometimes, as you go into communities or you're trying to create interventions. Yeah, and I think, Danny, that might also answer your question, right? Like, it's so critical to remember that the solutions come from the people. It's really an important part of that, is taking yourself out and the solutions coming from the people. I think that's one of our most important and most difficult, sometimes most difficult things to come to terms with. Yeah, I think, Danny, I hope that answers your question to some extent. Really trying to come out of it, but also for a community that has opposing viewpoints, I think you're talking about probably internal strife also that's going on in a community. That coalition building is so critical. Talking, gaining rapport with other groups, gaining rapport with people that you don't agree with, and coming and finding those points that you do agree with so you can move the work forward is very important. And here in Michigan, I mean, I've been a part of several coalitions, and there are many people a lot of times in the room that I don't agree with their other, issues and stances on things. But if we're working on, for example, economic equity, then that's what we're working on. And at least we can get to, join and work on that specific topic area. I think finding a topic area and because you're bringing a coalition for that specific topic area, right? So like you're going to be unified in that specific topic area. And so that makes it a little easier to work with. But again, we all come in our wholeness, right? We come with all of us. We are multifaceted individuals. We are multifaceted organizations. We come with all of us. So it's sticky and complex and complicated, but I think if you're working on one specific topic area, it becomes easier to keep on unifying and working towards that end goal. And so probably also, in coalitions, it's really critical to call out what that end goal is. What is the mission of this coalition? What is it that we're trying to change so that we can remain focused on that specific aspect that we're trying to change? Any other questions? And, actually another answer to that question that you asked, Dwayne, about what's the biggest challenges? Burnout and self-care. And a lot of times also in my classes, when I do have guest speakers, I always ask them, what do you do for self-care? Because I think that is something that we all give the least priority to, is taking care of ourselves. And I really believe that you cannot give unless you have. And so it's very critical to also recognize when you need to take a step back and just take care of yourself and take care of all that, the trauma that we see when we're working with communities, individuals, and it causes on us. I think and it's hard to take that step back because sometimes you feel like you're the only person that can actually do anything, or you need to be there. But, I had to take a step back 4 years ago. I had, after that year at the Muslim Student Association, I dealt with actually a lot of trauma. I had a lot of panic attacks that year because of the crises that I was going through, or not I was going through, but the students were going through, right? I mean, I would have, oh my gosh, all sorts of things happening. And then not just for the students, but even the amount of scrutiny that was being placed on our own organization. And, just, it was intense. It was really intense. And I had to take a step back. I just took 2 years off. But it also helped me to recognize that I am not indispensable, right? That there are other people that can pick up and take the work. I don't have to always be there. That's, I think, another very important thing to understand, is that you don't always have to be there. There are others. And that's why we are trying to create sustainable solutions for communities. That's why we are attempting to empower the individuals and the communities that we work with, so that you can take that step back and that the work can continue. In regards to cultural media, some examples of when someone who is not a part of that community should step back or could be unhelpful to the situation. Yeah, I actually, Linda, one time, I hope she talks about it in her June webinar, but she had actually once, when the Breonna Taylor incident had happened, she had gone down there immediately. And she talks about this really beautifully, actually, about how when the verdict was given, all of, especially the Black women in the community, just started crying and, just upset and all of that. And she talks about how she actually, not just figuratively, but physically took a step back, because she recognized at that point that she is that, that the community themselves has to mourn, and she can't offer anything. And in fact, she could have been maybe even an obtrusion or an annoyance to people, to individuals that she was working with that loved her, So there are times that that within your own positionality, sometimes you have to step back. And that's the whole humility of it all, right? I like I said before, I love that word, cultural humility. I think it changes that idea so much about the difference between cultural competence. You can never be competent. We know that, right? We all know that as social workers, we can never be competent, but we can always be humble, right? We can always be humble and continue to learn and to recognize our own vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and all of that. As we go into our communities, how and social work, communication, media, and community. Yeah, I do actually. I should, so the question is, how does social work engage the media and community organizing efforts? And do you have any best practices for reaching out to media outlets? This is something that actually I'm really passionate about, but I haven't really delved into it for a bit. It's been a minute. I actually used to run a radio show locally out in Detroit. This is a crazy opportunity that had showed up on my doorstep, and I ran it for almost a year. And through that, and just other media trainings that I've had nationally. I've actually picked up a lot of media training and best practices, but there's a whole list of them. Maybe that should be our next lunch and learn, actually. And that's something that the reason why I'm passionate about this as a social worker, I'll tell you why, is because we don't publicize our gains as social workers. We don't because we don't feel like that's part of our own humility almost to a certain extent, right? Like we don't feel like it's something that needs to be publicized, but good news matters, right? Good news matters so much when you're in a world that brings out only the bad news, right? So I think that it's really critical that we do talk about our gains, talk about our successes, but how do you do it, right? How do you do it in an effective manner? How do you create stories that are concise and precise, that can be marketed out as positive stories? I don't know if any of you follow Humans of New York on Instagram. They're so cool. But like, he's mastered the art of storytelling, right? Like his stories, I don't know if you like the last two that were like 12 segments long. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat that whole day. I think there was the last two. I can't remember. It was that one woman that's a real estate agent, and the other one, oh, that story of if you don't follow it, you have to follow it. It's so cool. But there's a recent story that happened with a Black student whose debate teacher changed his entire life. I mean, completely transformed this student's entire life. It's just incredible. And actually, that ended up, I think, he created a GoFundMe, and they raised $1 million in like a couple hours after this whole story was like told. Go follow. It's so cool. But anyhow, but we have to learn how to master this. It's so important for us as social workers in our organizations. I think that should be our next lunch and learn, Dwayne. So I have many best practices for reaching out to media outlets. There's a way to do it right. There's a science behind it. There's a way to teach yourself how to speak out the most important things. What are those most important things? There's a way of creating the stories that you want to create. There's so many best practices, but it's not, I can't tell you in 5 minutes. So maybe that's our next topic, guys. But I think, okay, so a couple really quick things is I would reach out to media outlets, your local ones. Let them know who you are. Let them know the work you're doing. Relationships are critical in everything, absolutely everything in our lives, but especially also in media outlets. Like once they have that relationship with you, they know that you're a social worker. They know that you're working on mental health things. Like it's National Mental Health Month this month. You know, a few months ago, it was National Social Workers Month, right? But there wasn't much out there in the media, unfortunately, about it, which makes me sad, right? Because it's like, well, this, like, especially National Social Workers Month, they're like, this was our month. Like, there's so much we could have talked about. There's so many stories we could have told, right? There's so much we could have talked about the importance of social work in this critical moment of history and all of this. But we need to be out there. We have to do a lot of things, right? It's hard to kind of figure out what it is that we need to do first, second, third, but I really think this is something important within our profession that we have to start mastering and getting used to, is how to tell our positive stories and how to tell others about the importance of mental health. What does that mean, right? It's important to, mental health treatment is important, but what does that mean, right? How can I give you where are the resources? What do you need? All of that. Like,